All right, people. We're going to take a look at one factor that's been determining Bitcoin's rise and fall. And that's right, it's not really news, it's not technical analysis, it's actually Bitcoin ETF inflows and outflows. And it is the one overarching factor on whether Bitcoin is going up or going down each day. As you can see, this is the weekly outflows. This is last week over here. And you can see that this basically mirrors exactly how Bitcoin has been acting since the ETF. We had here this big negative week, although it doesn't really look super negative with respect to the rest of it. We had the second huge negative week, and that's when Bitcoin essentially dropped to 38,000 from 46,000 because of the FTX sale. This was that 1 week a couple of weeks ago where Genesis sold and we dropped again. As you noticed, the next week after Genesis sold, we went up, and that basically recovered all our losses. And that is definitely represented by basically the ETF inflows canceling out the ETF outflows from last week. So even the numbers directly match up. And after we went down to 38,000, you can see that we basically went straight up to 73,000 without any regards for any kind of Fibonacci retracement levels or any technical analysis resistances. And that is because we had several weeks of just completely positive inflow and some really large inflows. The week we peaked, we had the largest inflows. And since then, we've been kind of middling here. And we've actually had more down weeks than up weeks. And as you can see, last week, towards the end, was definitely down. And of course, we really dropped in the weekend when the ETF was off. And that was because of like news of the Israel-Iran thing. Just like, when Russia attacked Ukraine, it went way down. When Israel and Iran kind of like exchanged missiles and such, obviously it's going to go down as well. But this time it's not as bad. It didn't keep going down because we're in a bull market instead of a bear market. Now, some of you might be thinking that like BlackRock is just buying and selling to gain an advantage in the market. But, if they were doing that, they wouldn't have like 5 weeks of straight massive gains. This is obviously after the initial dump of FTX. People, retail buyers of ETFs, completely clamoring in. And, this was seen in the first month and a half after the Bitcoin ETF launched, that it was hot and everyone was trying to get in. But this chunk basically represents big retail buyers buying. There are several of you in my chat that have told me that you bought IBIT, and this kind of represents you guys. Because the big institutions, according to reports, have not started to come in yet. And they won't start to come in until the later half of Q2 because there's a lot of paperwork and regulatory hurdles to actually clear. Pension funds and other investment funds may not come in until much later in the year because of further congressional approval or further regulatory approval. There's a lot to actually be made out of this. There's a lot to really digest in. Just because an ETF is out there doesn't mean you can straight up buy it for your fund. There's a lot of stuff that you actually have to work through, especially if it's a new asset class. And that's why a lot of the Bloomberg analysts are saying that realistically, you can't expect the big fund inflows until later in Q2, if not later. And the big fund inflows might actually be bigger than these right here that you see. Because the big fund inflows, these are big, institutional funds that have billions of dollars and they might want to allocate a bit to crypto. Right now, I believe the Bitcoin ETF has about 12 to 15 billion right now, and they're predicting now, a lot of analysts, $1 trillion over 10 years. So by the end of this year, we should have over $100 billion in the ETF fund by their guesses. And that means there's going to be massive buying on a level that even outpaces these couple of weeks here, sometime probably in the summer or probably in the fall. And that's why I'm so bullish on it right now. The problem with these statistics is they don't really come out until like the day after or even the week after. And the previous day's ETF inflows don't really come out until a couple of weeks, a couple of hours at least, or just like the next day around noon or something. So those statistics can't really help you to determine what's going on unless you have someone on the inside at BlackRock or like Grayscale or Fidelity, knowing that what their customers are buying at the time. And remember, these ETFs, they're not buying for themselves, they're buying for their customers, so it depends on how much their customers buy. Like Grayscale has had to sell a lot because all their customers are selling, going to the other ETFs or just exiting the market. Like Genesis here and Grayscale here had to dump because they essentially had to liquidate their companies, so they didn't really have that much of a choice. So there's a lot of pull and push here, and it's not as easy as it seems. You can't really use the data to project ahead of time because each individual week can be different. Like, you can't, like, after the the Genesis sell-off, you could kind of guess it was going up. But, in the subsequent weeks where the volume is down, because I think most of the retail volume has essentially like kind of calmed down, and the big like institutional volume hasn't actually come in yet, you don't really know what it's going to be week by week. So doing like leverage longs or leverage shorts based on previous week's data is probably no good. If you know that like a big certain fund is going to come in next week, then, it's good to buy then. Now, the next big move will be the Hong Kong ETFs. It takes about 2 weeks between ETF approval, which happened today on both Bitcoin and Ethereum, by the way, and when they actually listed on the market. So at the end of April, about a week after the halving, that's when the Hong Kong ETFs hit the market. And we should see some buying right there because both the businesses in Hong Kong and Chinese businessmen who have their proxy in Hong Kong will actually want to use that particular opportunity to buy the ETF. So that actually could be the next trigger, bringing us up to past 70K or 80K. You might have to wait until the end of April. And that makes sense because after the post-halving, I think like based on the hash rate, the price has to be about 75, 80K for the Bitcoin miners to be profitable. And of course, they're not going to kill the Bitcoin mining industry because Bitcoin as a whole relies on that. And there's too much money in the Bitcoin mining industry and Bitcoin industry to just completely let it all collapse, at least right now. Eventually, I think Bitcoin's like halving thing will be its downfall because you can't like maintain doubling energy requirements like every 4 years, if not more. But that's for far off in the future. That's not really for right now. So if you look at the inflow outflow chart, you can actually tell the Bitcoin ETFs are the Bitcoin inflows and outflows out of the ETFs. Maybe some news on the weekend, like big news, like the Iran Israel thing, because it's akin to the whole Ukraine Russia thing. Big news like that, the starting of big like events that could destabilize parts of the world, that will have an effect too. But overall, it's not TA, it's not like other news that really drives the markets right now. It is entirely Bitcoin ETF outflows because this graph essentially completely shows that like when we've gone up, almost to the day, when we've gone up, the inflows have gone up. When we've gone down, the outflows have actually gone up. Of course, on weekends, you don't really have that, and that's why it was the Israel-Iran thing over the weekend. And we don't really know what the data is like going to be like for this week. But based on the last few weeks, which is a very dangerous thing to guess on, my guess is going to be about even at this point because the excitement for the Bitcoin ETFs has basically waned off from the retail side, and the institutional side isn't ready to come in yet. So based on that, I'm going to guess this week's inflow outflow is going to be fairly even. And then people are going to be watching geopolitics a whole lot at this point to see what's going to happen next. So that's what I have to say for today. Like and subscribe. Hit that bell notifications button, and I will see you guys later.